You're listening to a podcast from the University of Manchester.
Today in our studio at the University of Manchester, I'm talking to Professor Vikas Shah MBE. He's one of the UK's most high-profile entrepreneurs and philanthropists who started his first business aged just 14, and he's now the Chief Executive Officer of Swisscot Group. He is an Honorary Professor of Business and Entrepreneurship at Alliance Manchester Business School, as well as the author of the online journal Thought Economics and a book of poetry. An accomplished public speaker, he has interviewed some of the world's most prominent leaders and thinkers, including Buzz Aldrin, Melinda Gates and Sir Richard Branson. Vikas was awarded an MBE in the 2018 Queen's New Year Honours List and sits on the boards of several charities and organisations. From the outside, he's an incredibly successful businessman, but he has spoken publicly about his battle with depression and anxiety in a bid to raise awareness about mental health. And that's why we're talking to him today as part of a series of podcasts we're publishing to mark World Mental Health Day. So first of all, can we just say many thanks for making time in your busy schedule to talk to us today?
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Yeah. So you're an incredibly driven and successful entrepreneur with a number of different interests. So how do you make sure you make time to focus on you?
It's really hard. You see, the thing is, there's this weird mantra in entrepreneurship, and it's kind of a curiously European kind of British thing where people assume, I've got to work 20 hours a day and I've got to always be on the grind. And I think the truth is that some of that's just guilt-driven, where people think if I'm not working on my business, I'm not being productive, or if I'm not doing something specifically around progress, I'm not being productive. But you kind of quickly realize that if you're not healthy, and if you're not on good form, your business won't be. And if you're not leading from the front and showing people that actually it's important to take care of yourself, your team won't, because they'll look to you to be, I guess, an example of how they should be behaving. So some of it is just you have to, because when you burn out, it's horrible, and that kind of teaches you a hard lesson. But some of it is just you have an obligation to do that because you want your team to do the same. So
it's something you actively encourage your team to do as well, is it? You encourage them to take time to refocus?
Well, yeah, because the other aspect of it is having a bit of a holistic understanding of what's important in life, right? And you know what? Yeah, I've been very lucky and the businesses have done well and all that good stuff. But, it's a job like any other. And there's so much more to life than what you do for a living. And if you don't take time out for yourself, you very quickly find that what you do for a living becomes who you are. And that's a really dangerous place to be.
Let's go back to kind of like the start of your career, if you like. You started your first business at the age of 14. So how did that come about? It's quite a young age, that.
Yeah, and it was largely by accident, to the extent that I wanted to be an airline pilot. And that was a very, very, very expensive career to go into. And the only way that was going to work out for me was just having a side hustle, right? And so the side hustle that I'd chosen was building websites, because back then it was really easy and not many people were doing it, and people sort of started to need websites. And I just thought, well, hey, this could be a fun way to pay for flying lessons, and that could help me pursue the dream. And what I didn't realize at the time was the internet was about to, explode. And so this little side hustle turned into a business. So I was kind of still at school and had employees and offices, and it was really bizarre. And it was kind of unintended. But the thing is, when you start on a path and things just kind of start to work, you just follow it. It'd be almost strange not to, especially when things are really, really working. Curious minds go, well, I wonder where that's going to lead. And that turned into a business.
You had this ambition to be a pilot.
Yeah.
Is that something you ever think you'll go back to?
Well, I kind of satisfied it with a private pilot's license, but that's a much less glamorous way than flying big jets around the world.
Well, no, but it's still fulfilling that part of your dream, though, in a way, isn't it?
It got deflected into Hobbyland as opposed to Careerland, yeah.
Sometimes maybe that's better.
I think so.
So you talk about your curiosity as a child and building websites and taking things apart to see how they work. And I noticed that you link this almost in a way to your feelings of anxiety as a child.
Yeah, but I didn't know what it was or that it was called anxiety because, when you're kind of full of nervous energy and the energy just channels into something. And so, nowadays people get a diagnosis for it. But, it was just this big ball of nervous energy and you just sort of, maybe stayed up late playing games or building stuff or going out or whatever it was. But I didn't realize that that was called anxiety. I didn't realize that this sensation was called anxiety. I just thought, oh, well, that's just how I feel right now. And it was only really a bit later when it started to become a bit more consuming. So, having this kind of nervous, giddy energy was kind of fine and it sort of helps you be productive. It's kind of like having a caffeine high, right? But then when it gets to the point where it consumes you, so you can't really think about much else, or you start to get really intrusive thoughts, your thoughts lock on things, and all of a sudden you can't function as you normally would want to because of this sensation. And that's really when I started to think, oh gosh, something's amiss.
And is that something that has carried on throughout your life, do you feel?
Well, it's definitely more in control now because, and again, it's a function of not really knowing what it was or what to do about it. And you're not really taught how to manage your mental health at school in the same way that at school they teach you, right, you need to go out for a run and lift weights or whatever. They don't really teach you how to manage your mental health. They don't say you need to be mindful, you need to do this. So you kind of have to learn and build your own toolkit to do it. So, now I've got much better tools in my head for what to do if I feel anxious or if I feel down or if I don't feel like I'm having a good brain day. And so I'm happy to be in that position now, but it took a long time to get to that.
Right.
But I suspect it's something that will always be with me in some shape or another because that's just kind of how my brain works.
So that was kind of the anxiety. So at what point in your life did you realise that you were also suffering from depression?
So I think one thing sort of leads into the other to the extent that, the whole thing with anxiety is that analogy of being chased by a lion, right? So you're in the jungle, there's a lion behind you being chased, your adrenaline's flowing, so you don't really stop to look at anything, you just keep running. And so when you're in fight or flight mode like that for such a long time and it's constant, your body gets exhausted and you get depressed because you're burnt out. You're burnt out from having anxiety. And so very quickly, this kind of states of anxiety started to lead into states of just feeling immensely down and really, just not happy with anything. And to be honest, I didn't really do much about it until the point where it got so bad that I started having thoughts about, initially harming and then onwards towards, looking at how do you kill yourself. It got really dark, and it was only really at that point that I thought, I need to do something about this.
Was it a case of the more successful you became, the more those feelings were heightened?
No, I think it was more the case that the more successful the business got, the more I could hide it. Because it's one of those horrible things. People hold people in esteem for pointless reasons, right? Like I hear the bio that I get written about me, and I'm like, oh God, like that's like quite a cool person. I wonder who that is. But it's just a cultural thing that we hold that person in esteem. Whereas my view is like, everyone should be on a level. But when it's your business and your business is growing, no one says anything to you. No one goes, you should stop, or are you okay? But you can hide, you can make excuses, you can, the freedom that success gives you the ability to hide. Right. And that ability to hide is a really bad thing. If I was in any other job and my performance was dipping because I was anxious and depressed, my line manager would be like, are you okay? Like, is everything okay? Do you need to have a chat? But no one does that when you're the boss.
Yeah.
So you have to really wait until you hit a brick wall.
Yeah.
And then make a decision yourself. Or if you're lucky, maybe you've got friends or family around you who might intervene.
You've spoken very honestly and openly about your own mental health. Why did you decide to speak publicly about it?
I didn't. It was an accident.
Right.
And but I'm glad I did. Basically, so what happened was there was a business event, one of these typical business breakfast events where they get a few of you on a panel and ask you kind of these standard businessy questions. And I just really was having a bad day that day. I was feeling really low and not in a good place. And one of the wonderful pre-prepared questions was, so what are the challenges of being an entrepreneur? And I just said, yes, 10 years of depression, to be honest. And it was one of those things where I didn't sort of intend to say it. I'd had this nice soundbite kind of answer prepared around it, but I'm really glad I did, because I didn't realize how much of a shared experience that was in the business world. And also just frankly, how many people are going through it and don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And it just seemed odd, because the reason I didn't talk about it was not because there was any sense of taboo or shame. It's just not something you talk about.
Yeah.
So I was never embarrassed about it. It's just not part of vocab. It's just not something that you talk about. And I think that's one of the challenges for me is people always think we don't talk about things because of a taboo. I don't think it is. I think it's just because that's just not something you talk about.
Right.
That's very different to a taboo. It's just a cultural norm.
Because I was reading an article in Men's Health magazine yesterday, and the article's author said that men's fixation with strength is actually making them more vulnerable. Would you agree with that? Is it because men are viewed as these figures of having strength? And
I think rather than it being a product of, I mean, look, let me be clear. There's definitely a massive problem around toxic masculinity. I think the caricature of masculinity that magazines pervade and persuade people they need to buy into is really dangerous, in the same way that toxic femininity pervaded women's magazines and persuaded everyone they have to be, a size 0 and all this kind of thing. But I think that's one really specific issue. I think the wider issue is around the fact that, men as a group don't have a group vocabulary for discussing emotion. So it's not like guys sit together over a drink and go, you know what, mate, I'm just feeling a bit down, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's just not what you do. And again, it's not because I think people are embarrassed about it. It's just not culturally what is done. And so I think part of it is about making sure that people know, well, actually, no, you just talk about it. It's fine. No one cares. Like, just talk. Be open with your mates is what you do. It's just normalizing it into the vocabulary is the most important thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's doing that is very different to treating it as a taboo, because taboos have to be broken and taboos have to be challenged and taboos make everything a really big deal. Whereas this shouldn't be made a really big deal. It should just be normalized into conversation.
So when you spoke about depression at the business event, did you then feel like you were a bit of a lone voice in the business world talking about mental health?
Definitely. And I think some of that is because the view of business people is still centered around this awful hyper-alpha, hyper-masculine, apprentice-type version of what a business person should be like. And the reality is that's not true. There are a few people that I've met over the years who genuinely are a bit psychopathic and just genuinely are like that. But most people are just people, right? And I think most people just don't talk about it because they want to be perceived as this caricature of what a business person should be. And that's really unhealthy, because all of a sudden you're just projecting this image of who you hope people see you as rather than who you are. And then you spend a lot of your time trying to match up to the person that you've created rather than just being yourself.
So you talk about quite a hugely significant moment in your life you describe as your sanctuary. Do you mind telling us what happened that day? I think it is actually quite profound.
So it was, we all have places we go just to get away, and they're often places which are a bit hidden and stuff. And so for me, it was just, there's a car park next to the office where I used to go because there's a lovely view from the top floor, and it was just, no one knows you're there. It's a car park, right? And I think the big moment of, not a turning point perhaps, but the big pivot moment was, being on that car park, deciding, I'm done. And really just being ready to jump. And it's strange because it's frightening that you'd do that. It frightens you that you would want to do that. And it frightens you with the ease at which you would do it. Because, it's not like the TVs depict where they'll show somebody who's like, having this massive kind of like, oh my God, everything's awful. It's a very clear decision at the time. It's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And you feel kind of good and peaceful about it. And that's the frightening thing.
Yeah.
And it was only because I'd made a phone call to the Samaritans for a chat at that moment that I didn't.
Well, it's a very brave account of what happened, and I don't think anyone really could fail to be moved by it.
It was like a watershed, right? Because everyone's got secrets. Everyone's got stuff gnawing away at them that they'd wish they want to say, and this was one of those. This was one of those things where the weight of not saying it was so profound that the act of being able to speak to someone who's a stranger, the act of being able to speak to someone and say, I feel like this. I feel like I want to end it all. I'm done with life. Opening up and just saying it took the weight off a bit. It reduced its intensity. It committed that to the real world. So rather than this kind of demon sat in my head saying, oh, you're going to kill yourself, haha, it was, someone else knows how I feel.
Yeah.
And actually, it wasn't as scary as I thought to say that. So it's almost just the first step towards then being able to go to your GP and go, I felt like this.
So in some respects, it felt easier to say it to a stranger.
Totally, because I didn't know them and they didn't know me and they weren't going to judge me.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter. It was a zero consequence conversation. And that was the beauty of the anonymity aspect of it, because the other side is, particularly in the business world, when people hype you up and stuff, you kind of have a public profile and things, and you kind of get worried, oh, what will people think, and blah, blah, blah. And those kind of awful social worries do impact what you say. And it's a shame, but it's just the fact, right? And so the anonymity of something like the Samaritans, I think, was really important for me.
It's obviously been, a long road in effect to recovery. What do you think kept you going through that time?
I don't know, because it's not like as part of the recovery process you think, right, well, here's my 10-year life plan and I'm going to go and do this. It's more just, every now and again you see a little bit of hope, like you feel a little bit better, or you realise, oh, wow, that's what it feels like when I'm not anxious, or, oh, gosh, I could do this now and not feel bad about it. Or, it's like tiny little bits of hope you get on the recovery journey, which show you a little glimpse of the fact that actually, life can be pretty good once you've got through this. And that really kept me going, because it just showed me that I didn't have to feel like that, and that there was a way out, and that wasn't just how I was going to be forever. Because I think that's always one of the worries, is when it's in your mind, like something goes wrong with your arm, they can cut it off, right?
Yeah.
It's like you get a tumour, they can cut it out. But when it's in your mind and it's interspersed with the very fabric of who you are, you can't see yourself without it, because all of a sudden it's not like you can't escape yourself in your head.
Yeah.
You're stuck with that.
Yeah.
And so when the yourself in your head is anxious and depressed, and that's your understanding of who you are and how you are, you can't think you can escape it. And so the recovery journey, the little glisten of hope that says, actually, yeah, that's not how I have to be, that's what kept me going.
So you talked about those small steps. Do you think depression is something you ever completely recover from, or will it always be a presence?
I can only give you my own view, because I'm not a doctor and I'm not a professional at this, but I think it probably always will be. But that's fine.
Yeah.
I also have a slip disc, in fact 2, and
right.
and they will always be a part of my slightly weaker than normal back. But guess what? I just adapt. I strengthen. I do Pilates. I'll do specific exercises. I'll take care of my back, and that's fine. And so in general, my back doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
And in the same way, I know that I have this particular way of being which causes me to be depressed, and that's fine as long as I know how to strengthen my mind. What do I do about it? And the same thing is with my back. When it flares up, I've got a plan of, right, my back really hurts today, here's what I'm going to do, and here's what I'm not going to do. And see, I kind of have to just treat it like that, as one of those things that's probably always going to be there.
Yeah.
But I have a toolkit to know what to do about it.
To deal with it.
But that's actually really important, because there's this horrible feeling where people feel like, oh, I can read a self-help book and do a gong bath and I'll be cured. And I just think that's really unhelpful, because you probably won't. But that's fine.
Yeah.
Like, you can live a perfectly normal life while still being a bit anxious. It's fine. Like, it's you can get it to a manageable level, whatever the extent of your mental health condition. You don't have to be stopped by it.
Yeah.
And you can live with it, and you can live forever with it, and that's fine.
Accepting that is almost part of the recovery as well, isn't it? I think.
Totally.
Not trying to fight it. And
a really good analogy, one of my therapists said, you've got to treat it like grief. If someone dies, you can't get them back.
Yeah.
It's a final thing. This person has gone. So it's up to you to decide, what are you going to do about that?
Yeah.
Are you going to sit there crying forever, or are you going to get on with your life? You can't bring them back. In the same way, this is what it is.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it?
I think it's probably a really, really good comparison, actually. So we'll move on to some of your other interests. So you've interviewed some of the world's most well-known leaders and thinkers.
Yeah.
So what led you down that particular path of interest?
So thought economics is a hobby that went rogue. And so the whole essence of this was, after the dot-com bubble, people started to kind of get this gauge, oh, wow, we can make money publishing online. But as a result of this, the business model of publishing changed quite dramatically. All these magazines and newspapers that I used to really enjoy reading suddenly started to kind of, not dumb down, it's the wrong word, but they started to change their content from being quite long form, novel style articles that I quite liked, like long essays and journal length articles, to being kind of sound bites and snippets and infographics. And I get it, because that's how they were making money, for maximum audience. I didn't like that. So I just thought, well, maybe I should just write some stuff. And initially it was literally just me interviewing people I knew and saying, hey, look, let's just have a conversation and see if anybody else wants to read it. And that kind of, built an audience. And then I just got really cheeky and said, well, I wonder who else I can speak to. And Jimmy Wales, who founded Wikipedia, gave me a chance. And I emailed him and he was like, hey, this sounds kind of fun. Yeah, let's have a chat. And then I was like, wow, that was fun. And it was just a hobby that I never knew I had. Yeah. I never knew I enjoyed interviewing people. I never knew it was going to be a fun thing. And that then mushroomed into thought economics. And so the whole essence of thought economics is to capture conversations with the people who are shaping the century and just getting to know them over a conversation and then just publishing that conversation online. But it is a blog. It is a hobby. It doesn't monetize. I don't ever want it to be a job. It's just a fun hobby that happens to have a big audience.
There's a huge list of people that you've interviewed. Is there something you think that they all have in common?
It's kind of interesting because I didn't think there would be. So, when you're interviewing Nobel Peace Prize winner and a pop star and an entrepreneur and, Holocaust survivor and all sorts of different people, you kind of think they're all going to be really different. But then, there's certain characteristics that just shine out throughout them. So, a sense of curiosity. Everyone that I've ever interviewed has achieved something great in their field as a curious mind. They're all really big on resilience and emotional and psychological strength, not in a kind of Tony Robbins-esque way, but in a real you have to be kind of strong if you want to succeed, because life's really hard, right? And they're all just really compassionate people. They're just real, they really understand humanity and understand people. But it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because we talk about the economy and we talk about the weather and we talk about all these things like they're apart from us. And the economy isn't apart from us, that's people. Culture isn't apart from us, it's people. And so if you understand and are compassionate with people, you'll kind of probably get ahead, right? I think the other thing is they all found their thing, right? Because they were curious enough to try so many things in life, they found the thing that they could get really passionate about. That might be music, it might be art, it might be politics, it might be business. But most people, unfortunately, don't give themselves the chance to experiment with things in life, to figure out what are you good at, what do you suck at, and what's your purpose.
How do you see business education changing over the years? Consumers are becoming more socially and ethically aware, and I think business education has got to change to reflect that. Is that something that you feel?
I think education, period, has to change to reflect that, because the nature of what education's there for has changed, right? The education system that we have in most of the kind of occidental parts of civilization are based around this notion of we need really good people to put in factories who are kind of compliant, kind of smart, and maybe can become managers. And on the flip side, part of our education system says, well, we kind of need specialists because that's just how the employment world works. But the challenge we've got now is the world doesn't work like that anymore. We don't need a nice, compliant person to be in a factory. We need people who are individuals, who are able to fight, who are able to negotiate, who are able to lead, who are able to have multiple careers, who can learn quickly and can adapt. And it's a whole different skill set. So I think business education in particular has to adapt to the fact that the workplace is changing and the nature of what constitutes a business is changing. But I think education in general needs to give people more of a commercial sense of how the world works. And that's not just business, by the way. That's civics. So the fact that, you might learn about the Battle of Hastings or whatever, but they don't teach you at school. How does Parliament work?
Yeah.
How does the House of Lords work? How does the House of Commons work? How do you vote?
I think we all wish we knew that at the moment.
But these are things which you need to know if you want to participate well in society. When things are changing rapidly, for the longest time, government was boring. You didn't need to know about it because nothing happened. Every 4 years there was an election. The Queen's always there. It was very boring, fine. But at a period in time where we have terrorism, global political conflict, rapidly changing situations, an erosion of democracy, businesses scaling and going bust all the times, you have to understand these real detailed nuances of how the world works. And I really wish that was more included in education, because that's what we need in terms of our future citizenry.
What's the single most important thing you think companies and organisations can do to improve employee well-being?
Stop calling them employees, right?
Right.
I get that we have the lingo,
Yeah.
but like, imagine this. Imagine if I said to you, right, you're going to build a village, and in the village you're going to have all these people. Your aims would be very different. Your aims would be, well, I need to make sure they've got houses and they've got things to do and there's a restaurant and animals, whatever. And the thing is, every day a whole bunch of people come through the door in my building and they spend more time with me than they do with their family. They've chosen to spend more time with me than with their family. And yeah, we pay people, but that's just the contract of them being there to do something. But the responsibility that I have to them as an employer is the village. I have to make sure that I am emotionally, socially, economically, and culturally paying them and helping them improve. Because the last thing I want is a building full of drones. If people want to go learn a language, then I need to help them do that. If they want to self-develop, I need to help them do that. If they want to leave the company to go and pursue a dream, then I need to do that, because that's really what a company's there for. A company is a village and is part of a network of villages that constitute society. And you might have a village of a sports club, or it might be another company, or it might be a school, or whatever. But you have an obligation to them. And again, this is just an awful shadow of the industrial era. The industrial era said that, Mr. Mill owner, and it was typically, unfortunately, a Mr. Mill owner, has these, minions that come and work for him and make fabric, and they have to work hard and go home and have their bread and eat it, right? The managerial style of the industrial era, unfortunately, still casts a shadow very deeply into how companies are run. And even though we're not sat in a mill, I'm sure there's plenty of people, even in an institution like this, who feel that maybe they're on a production line. But that's just a hangover of one of the most remarkable periods of business history, which hasn't yet disappeared.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given? And what's the best piece of advice you would give?
Wow. No pressure, right? Advice comes from weird sources, right? And it's kind of funny, like, for me personally, a lot of it was just the people that are able to speak truth to you and not be scared about it. Like the person that says, just don't believe the hype, like, just stop it. That kind of advice is really critical. So it's not like one key phrase, like one big, phrase that hangs over my desk with a, from Mark Twain or whatever. It's just the people who are willing to be honest with you without fearing a consequence of that, I think, is the best advice you'll ever receive.
Yeah.
Because those are the people that say, just stop it, or what are you doing, or you need to get help, or I'm not going to be your friend anymore unless you change. That's what you need in life. You don't need a motivational quote like, never doubt the willingness of a whole group of small people to do something, blah, 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 blah. 'Cause that's not advice. That's just you feeling good about yourself because you know who Maya Angelou is. That's showing off. That's not advice. In terms of what I would give, I just felt, and this is going to sound really really trite, but it's not meant to, but it's kind of just realize that who you are is not what you do.
Yeah.
Like it's really sad that like you go to, let's say you go to a networking, I hate the word networking event, and or you go to a new social event. So let's do the social event. You're at a new friend's house party. You don't know any of their friends, and you walk up to someone and go, hey, tell me about you. The first thing they'll do is say, well, I'm a lawyer, or I'm a banker, or I do this.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of sad?
It is really,
so,
yes.
But that's because we define so much of who we are by what we
by
do.
What we do, yeah.
And I think being able to answer that question and say something else is really important. So I think that's one thing. And I think the second thing is just you kind of need to have a plan, not a plan in a big written plan, but you kind of need to know what direction you're pointing in life. But know why. Like maybe you want to make money, but why? And answering that why question's really important, because like I'll go speak in a school and you say to people like, what do you want to do? And it's really sad because they're like, oh yeah, want to be a footballer. Why? Well, want to make money. But why? Because I want to look after my mum. Right, I get it now.
Yeah, yeah.
Because once you know the why, and if the why for that young lad was, I want to look after my mum, well, there's lots of ways you can do that. You don't have to just do football, right?
Yeah.
But it's that very binary life we live in where people just think of this one big goal of being on telly or playing football or whatever as being the answer to all the world's evils. And unless you really know deeply what that why is that you're here for, you can't orient your life around getting it. And again, it takes a lot of introspection and honesty to get to that, but I think everyone needs to. Okay,
we ask all our interviewees this question. Describe what Manchester means to you in 3 words.
3 words.
Or 5.
Okay. And the words I'm speaking right now don't necessarily count. In 3 words. Home, wife, cats.
That's brilliant. I think that sums it up perfectly.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to us today. It's been absolutely fascinating listening to you. Thanks very much for your time. And that's it for today.
If you have been affected by any of the issues raised in this podcast, you can call the Samaritans 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on 116 123.